you just said something that's pretty fascinating that I guess is not something that it's in the back of my mind as I go throughout the day-to-day, which is in the Old Testament, you had these prophets that occasionally the culture would think that something that is going on that's not that big a deal, and the prophet's saying, oh, no, this is a big deal. So what's the modern-day equivalent of that?
Well, one, this is probably going to be a surprising position. I think comedians might be the closest thing we have to modern-day prophets. I think
that's a very interesting answer. I'm curious to hear what you have to say here because I'm very fascinated by comedians.
Well, I am too. And I'm not saying every comedian. And I think that there are certainly, there are prophetic voices in some pulpits, not nearly as many as maybe should be. But think about a good comic. A good comic doesn't just simply make you laugh. A good comic makes you think, oh yeah, I've experienced that. Oh, I see that now. Oh, why didn't I see that before? Like, those are the moments where the reveal, the punchline is like, yeah, airline food is terrible, whatever it is, like there's an aha kind of moment. And comedians have this capacity to disarm you and will often distract you with the laugh in order to say something profound about culture or about human nature. Or, again, at least the comedians that I most resonate with. Not every comic is like this.
Certainly.
Some are just...
But a lot of times it's about authority, too.
That's true.
And this is the one thing I was thinking about more recently was, look, back in the day, I remember Black Knight, this movie, all these other movies that have, like, show things from, like, the medieval times. They have these court jesters. Like, it seems like in society, at least semi-modern society, that there's always been a place for these people that poke at power and culture when they think it's crazy, but they do it in a way that makes you laugh.
Yes.
And today we call them comics, and back then they called them court jesters, but there's always been this place. That's what I'm fascinated by.
Yes. And I think, too, it's worth noting, this is a little reductionistic, but in the Old Testament, you had temple prophets and you had wilderness prophets. Those are two different kinds of prophetic voices. Some, like Nathan with King David, he was a part of the temple staff. So he's, after all the Bathsheba stuff, Nathan tells David this parable, and David's incensed. He's like, this man needs to be put to death. And Nathan says, you're the man. You're the one in the story. He had access to David because he was a temple prophet. But then you also have these wilderness prophets, who are the ones that are often there's often a lot of like kind of street theater to them. It's a very different... They're kind of on the outskirts, and they're often kind of speaking on behalf of the marginalized because they're in the trenches with them. I don't know that we have as much of that right now. Maybe we do. That'd be an interesting conversation because I think a lot of times the comics that we know about probably are fairly successful, and they're getting specials and they're selling at arenas. And so there's a certain level of like, you're adjacent to power,
Well, it is something that I have heard Joe Rogan, who's become very successful as his podcast. It's the most successful thing he has going on, but he's also been doing comedy for a while. I've heard him talking to Louis C.K. recently, was on his podcast, and another comedian, and very successful comedian. They were talking about when you become successful, you have to understand your life is not the everyday person's life.
Yeah,
the everyday person's life is not hotels and airports and dinners and shows and specials, and it's not. So you have to like remember that what you're experiencing, not everyone is experiencing, and you need to do things that you need to do so that you can still understand the everyday person, because you have to understand that to resonate with them.
Totally.
So yeah, you're exactly right.
Well, and there's a shadow side to that too. If you remember, like the tragedy of Robin Williams, and the commentary was, how could someone seemingly so happy be so tortured? And what we know about dopamine receptors in the brain now is that after every like wave of dopamine, your brain opens up more receptors. So it requires a bigger wave of dopamine to achieve the same level of high. So you think about someone who disproportionately from the rest of us is spending a lot of time on a stage with laughter and affirmation. If that is normative for you, a regular day in a life of like, regular day from you and me would feel like torture. It feels normal to me and you, but if your baseline is this, man, just going to the store to pick up groceries could feel like torture. So this disparity. So yes, there's the hotels and the dinners and that's all fun. I think that's often the shadow side, though, is like it's hard to just exist in reality then. And if you're being recognized, all that you were saying, that a lot of these comics are introverts. the need to have to be on every time someone notices you at a coffee shop or whatever. That can really mess with somebody. Yep. And I think I think it's why we need to listen to them.
Yeah. Huh. That's a fascinating answer, man.